To everyone who knew him, David Miller was the kind of man you could trust. He smiled easily, spoke softly, and made everyone around him feel important. At 39, David had the life most men envied. A good job, a lovely wife named Laura, and 2 bright kids. They lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, where the neighbors described him as the guy who would shovel your driveway before his own. He coached his son's baseball team, attended every school recital, and always brought flowers for his wife's birthday. To outsiders, he was the definition of a devoted family man. But 120 miles away, in the small city of Eugene, another family knew him by a different name, Daniel Harper. Here, he lived with Emily, a freelance graphic designer, and their 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. He told Emily that his frequent trips to Portland were for corporate meetings and client presentations. She never questioned him. He was always gentle, always caring, always back home when he said he would be. What neither woman knew was that David, or Daniel, had been living this double life for nearly 10 years. And he was so good at it, so meticulous, that not even his closest friends or family had a clue. Every Sunday, he would leave for work at 6 a.m., claiming he had to prepare for an early Monday meeting. In truth, he'd drive straight down I-5 to Eugene, switch phones, change his clothes, and walk into his other life like an actor slipping into character. He had 2 sets of everything: phones, bank accounts, wedding rings, email addresses, and even social media profiles. The deception wasn't just about love. It was about control. David liked being the man everyone depended on, the husband, the father, the provider. He once told a coworker over drinks, "I don't believe in limits. You can be whoever you want, as many times as you want." The coworker laughed it off. But for David, it wasn't a joke, it was a philosophy. In Portland, he was the hardworking executive with a perfect family. In Eugene, he was the creative soul, the romantic dreamer, the kind of man who wrote poetry for his wife and drew chalk hearts on the sidewalk for his daughter. And somehow, for nearly a decade, both lives thrived. Until the day they didn't. David Miller's second life didn't start with a plan. It began with a business trip, or at least that's what he told himself later. Back in 2010, David was working as a regional marketing manager for a tech company based in Portland. His job required him to travel occasionally, mostly short trips across Oregon. He was married to Laura for 7 years by then. They had a son, Ethan, and a newborn daughter, Mia. They were, by all accounts, a happy family. Laura often joked that David was married to his work, but she didn't mind. He worked hard, provided well, and made her feel loved when he was home. Then came a 3-day conference in Eugene, a small city with tree-lined streets and coffee shops on every corner. David arrived late on a Friday night and checked into a downtown hotel. That's where he met Emily Carter. She was setting up the event's design booth, a local graphic artist with a bright smile and tired eyes. They got to talking while waiting for the hotel elevator, just casual chatter about how chaotic conferences could be. The next evening, they ran into each other again at the hotel bar. 1 drink turned into 2, and 2 turned into a conversation that stretched long past midnight. Emily wasn't like the people David worked with every day. She didn't care about deadlines or client pitches. She laughed easily, listened intently, and made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. By Sunday, he found himself saying something he never thought he would. "I wish this weekend didn't have to end." And when Emily smiled and said, "Then don't let it," he didn't. When David returned to Portland, he told Laura the trip had gone well. She kissed him, thanked him for working so hard, and handed him the baby. But something inside him had shifted. He started finding excuses to visit Eugene: client follow-ups, presentations, new accounts. Each trip lasted a bit longer than the last. Within 6 months, he and Emily were inseparable. He told her his name was Daniel Harper, that he was a freelance consultant who traveled for projects. He said he'd been divorced for a few years. A clean, believable story for a man in his late 30s. Emily didn't question it. He was charming, responsible, and never gave her a reason to doubt him. Soon, he rented a small townhouse on Crescent Avenue, the perfect place for weekends together. He spent his weekdays in Portland with Laura, and every Friday, he'd travel for work, switching seamlessly between husband and lover. It was exhilarating, dangerous, addictive. The more he lied, the easier it became. In 2012, Emily found out she was pregnant. She was nervous, but David or Daniel reassured her. "This is the best thing that's ever happened to me," he said. "I want to do this right. I'll be there for both of you always." And for years he attended ultrasounds, painted the nursery, and held Emily's hand when their daughter, Sophie, was born. In Portland, he sent Laura pictures from work trips, while secretly bottle-feeding his newborn 120 miles away. 2 houses, 2 lives, 2 families, perfectly balanced. He even kept separate calendars. Blue for Portland events, green for Eugene. He memorized every lie, every date, every story. He never mixed them up. Not once. But as the years went by, his lives began to blur. Laura would find receipts from restaurants she'd never been to. Emily noticed calls he'd silence without explanation. Both women brushed off their doubts. After all, David was always so loving, so attentive. And for nearly a decade, his illusion held strong. Until one day, fate decided to interfere. For most people, living one life is hard enough. For David Miller, living 2 was a full-time performance. One he'd perfected through careful planning, charm, and a frightening ability to lie without hesitation. Each week followed a strict routine, almost military in precision. Monday through Thursday, he was David, husband to Laura, father to Ethan and Mia, the man who grilled burgers on weekends and read bedtime stories before tucking the kids in. Every Friday morning, he'd kiss Laura goodbye, claiming to leave for a client presentation in Eugene. He'd load his car, switch off one phone, and turn on another, the one registered under his alias, Daniel Harper. By the time he reached Eugene, he was no longer the suburban husband from Portland. He was a different man. Daniel, a devoted partner to Emily and father to little Sophie. The transformation was seamless. He changed clothes in his car, casual button-downs instead of suits, sneakers instead of loafers. Even his tone of voice shifted, softer, more playful. To Emily, he was warm, artistic, sensitive, the kind of man who could spend hours painting with Sophie or cooking pasta from scratch. To Laura, he was the hardworking professional, reliable, and ambitious. The man who fixed leaky taps and planned family trips to Disneyland. He built 2 entire worlds from the ground up, and for a long time both believed they were the only one that existed. 2 phones, 2 wallets, 2 realities. David's system was flawless. He had 2 wallets, each with different IDs and credit cards. He used 2 separate banks, depositing paychecks into one and transferring portions to the other through a shell consulting firm he'd set up under Daniel Harper Consulting. His phones were his lifelines. He'd programmed each with separate apps, separate contacts, even separate voicemail greetings. If he ever got a text from the wrong person, he'd glance carefully before responding, always making sure he used the right tone, the right context, the right version of himself. He even used a simple but clever rule. Work phone when in Portland. Personal phone when in Eugene. Both wives accepted this logic without question. David never told wild lies. He understood that big lies attracted suspicion. Instead, he built his deception on ordinary details, believable, consistent, boring details. To Laura, he said his company had expanded its regional accounts and needed him in Eugene twice a month. To Emily, he said his consulting clients in Portland were demanding and occasionally required weekend visits. He even staged business calls, calling himself from a secondary number, rehearsing fake conversations within earshot of whichever wife he was with. He crafted entire timelines of his imaginary projects, complete with invoices, client emails, and receipts. It was exhausting but exhilarating. Each successful lie felt like proof of his control. He wasn't just living a double life, he was mastering it. By 2018, however, things were becoming more complicated. His kids were older, his schedules tighter. The time between both families stretched thinner than ever. In Portland, Ethan had joined a soccer team that played weekend tournaments, meaning David's business trips were becoming harder to justify. In Eugene, Sophie had started school, and her teachers wanted both parents to attend events. He couldn't be in 2 places at once, but he tried anyway. There were weekends he'd drive 4 hours straight, from Sophie's school play in Eugene to Ethan's soccer match in Portland, changing clothes and phones along the way, lying to both families about where he'd been. He'd come home with dark circles under his eyes, saying work was just getting more demanding. Laura began to worry about him. Emily thought he was burning out. Neither realized that his fatigue came not from work, but from the weight of the lies pressing down on him. It was a small mistake, but it almost shattered everything. One night, while David was in Eugene, Laura texted him about a family dinner the next evening. He meant to reply from his David phone, but absent-mindedly used the Daniel phone instead. The message went out. Can't wait to see you and the kids tomorrow. Love you. When he realized the error, his heart froze. He deleted the message within seconds, but it was too late. Laura's message app showed, "Message deleted." When he got home the next day, she asked, "Hey, did you text me something yesterday and delete it?" His mind raced. He smiled easily, shrugged. "Oh, that? Yeah, I was dictating something to my assistant and hit the wrong number. Didn't want to confuse you." She accepted it, though something in her eyes hinted at doubt. That night, when she kissed him goodnight, David lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, he felt fear. His perfect balance was slipping. By 2019, David Miller's double life had become a dangerous balancing act on a fraying wire. Every lie he told demanded two more to hold it up. Every excuse needed a backup story, a cover, a prop, until his entire existence was a web of half-truths, ready to collapse at the slightest tremor. To outsiders, he still looked like a man who had everything under control. A stable career, a loving family, a beautiful home. But inside, his two worlds were slowly beginning to collide. It started with Laura. For years, she had trusted David without question. He was dependable, predictable, always there when it mattered. But lately, something felt off. He'd begun to seem distracted at home, absent-minded, often staring at his phone when he thought no one was looking. She noticed new habits, too. He'd shower immediately after returning from trips. He'd started using a different cologne. He changed his phone password twice. First, she told herself it was stress. His company had been downsizing and he'd hinted about job insecurity. Maybe he was just anxious. But then came the photo. While cleaning their shared laptop, Laura found a folder labeled Client Files Eugene. She clicked it out of curiosity, and inside, she found photos. Not of clients. There was David, smiling in a park, holding a little girl she didn't recognize. The girl looked about 5 or 6, and standing beside them was a woman Laura had never seen before. Petite, brunette, with her hand resting gently on David's shoulder. The date on the photo was recent. Laura stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Maybe it was work-related? Maybe the girl was a client's daughter? But the way David was looking at them, it wasn't business. It was family. When he got home that night, Laura was quiet. She didn't mention the photos. Not yet. Instead, she smiled, served dinner, and watched him, the way one studies a stranger wearing a familiar face. Down in Eugene, Emily was growing restless too. David, or rather Daniel, had started acting differently. He was often late, sometimes canceling visits altogether with vague excuses. Client emergency, car trouble, network outage. At first, Emily accepted it. But soon, the excuses became too frequent to ignore. Then one evening, she noticed something strange. He'd left his phone on the kitchen counter while helping Sophie with her homework. It buzzed once, then again. The screen flashed with the name Laura M. Emily froze. When he returned to the kitchen, she asked casually, "Hey, who's Laura? I think she texted you." David's expression didn't change, but inside, panic surged. "Oh, she's just a client. I'm helping her company with a marketing campaign." It sounded plausible enough, but Emily's instincts whispered otherwise. That night, she lay awake next to him, pretending to sleep while replaying every inconsistency in her mind. His consulting trips that always seemed to land on the same weekends. The times he'd shown up smelling of perfume she didn't own. The wedding ring tan line on his finger he'd claimed was from years ago. Her heart ached with confusion. She loved him deeply, but something wasn't right. By now, David was juggling not just 2 families but 2 investigations. Laura had quietly begun to check his mileage, his credit card bills, his social media. Emily started tracking his business trips, noticing patterns that didn't add up. And still, he lied beautifully, effortlessly. To Laura, "That woman? Oh, she's from the client's PR team. We had a photo shoot in the park for an ad campaign." To Emily, "That call you saw? Is a potential client's wife. She coordinates schedules for her husband's company." Both women wanted to believe him. They had built their worlds around his words. But cracks were widening fast, and soon they wouldn't be able to look away. The breaking point came in October 2019. It was Sophie's 6th birthday. Emily had planned a small party at their home in Eugene, cake, balloons, and a few neighbors invited. David promised he'd be there by 3 p.m. At noon, he texted her, "Running late, car trouble, be there soon." But 3 p.m. came and went. So did 4 p.m. By 5 p.m., the guests had gone, and Sophie sat quietly in front of her half-melted cake, waiting. Emily called. No answer. At the same time, in Portland, Laura and the kids were celebrating David's mother's birthday. A family dinner he had sworn he couldn't miss because his company CEO was attending. He smiled through dinner, pretending not to think about the small girl waiting in another city. Later that week, Laura couldn't shake the unease in her gut. She opened his briefcase while he was in the shower and found a key she didn't recognize, attached to a fob labeled Crescent Avenue. When she asked him, he hesitated for a fraction of a second, then smiled. "That's from one of our client offices in Eugene. They gave me a spare." She nodded, but deep down she knew. The next weekend, while David claimed to be at a trade show, Laura decided to drive to Eugene herself. She followed the GPS location on his calendar to Crescent Avenue. There, parked outside a small townhouse, she saw it, his car. The one she'd kissed him goodbye in that morning. And then the door opened. Out came David, holding a little girl. Beside him, a woman stepped out, smiling lovingly as she kissed his cheek. Laura's breath caught in her throat. The truth hit her like a blade. Her husband didn't just have a secret. He had a second life. After that day on Crescent Avenue, Laura's world shattered. She didn't confront David right away. She wanted proof. She began collecting everything. Photos, bank statements, and screenshots of his work trips. Meanwhile, Emily was growing suspicious too. David's excuses became thinner, his visits shorter, and sometimes he'd vanish for entire weekends. Both women, hurt, confused, and determined, began to dig for the truth. One evening, Laura found a charity flyer in David's briefcase. It was for a fundraiser in Eugene, scheduled the following Saturday. The sponsor list included Harper Consulting. Something inside her snapped. She decided to go. That weekend, inside a crowded community hall, two women's paths finally crossed. Laura was scanning the crowd, heart pounding, when she saw him, David, laughing with a brunette woman holding a child. Their eyes met. For a second, time froze. Emily turned too, following David's gaze, and saw another woman staring straight at them, eyes wide with betrayal. David's face drained of color. Laura whispered, "So this is your client?" Emily looked from one to the other, realization flooding in. "What's going on, Daniel? Who is she?" David stammered, unable to speak. The room went silent around them. And just like that, his double life collapsed in one brutal public moment. The silence after Laura's words was deafening. Every eye in the room turned toward them, the perfect husband, caught between two women who both called him theirs. "Daniel." Emily's voice trembled. "She called you David. What is she talking about?" Laura stepped closer, her voice sharp with fury. "I'm his wife, the real one. Who are you?" Emily's face went pale. "Wife? He told me he was divorced years ago." David tried to speak, but nothing came out. His lies, 10 years of careful construction, had finally run out of words. Both women stared at him, the truth unfolding in front of everyone. The man they loved was a stranger. Emily grabbed Sophie's hand and backed away, tears streaming down her face. Laura's anger broke into disbelief. 10 years, David. 10 years of lies. 2 families. 2 children who think you're their father. David whispered, "Laura, please, I can explain." But she cut him off. "Don't. You've explained enough for a lifetime." As Emily rushed out, Laura turned and walked the other way. And for the first time in a decade, David Miller stood alone. Both lives gone, both families shattered. News of David's double life spread fast. Within days, everyone knew, neighbors, co-workers, even the local press. What began as whispers turned into headlines. Oregon man exposed for living double life. 2 families, 10 years of lies. Both Laura and Emily were devastated. Laura filed for divorce immediately, hiring a private investigator to uncover the full extent of his deception. Emily, heartbroken, refused to let David see their daughter until she had answers. When the truth came out, it was worse than either had imagined. David hadn't just hidden another relationship. He'd forged documents, lied about income, and used fake business identities to fund both households. The police were soon involved, not for murder or violence, but for fraud and identity falsification. Investigators found 2 driver's licenses, both real, both under different names. At his office, David's co-workers were stunned. He'd always been polite, professional, quiet. No one could believe that the man they saw in meetings was secretly living a double existence. In his confession to authorities, David claimed, "I never meant to hurt anyone. I just couldn't choose. I loved them both. In different ways." But love had turned into manipulation. And when the story went public, both families faced humiliation and grief, especially the children, who struggled to understand why their father had 2 lives and 2 names. David lost everything, his job, his home, and both families. The man who had controlled 2 worlds could no longer control even his own story. The truth had finally set everyone free, except him. The weeks after the discovery were chaos. Laura moved out with the kids, refusing any contact. Emily quit her job and took Sophie to her parents' house, too ashamed to face neighbors. David's employer fired him for falsifying records, and his bank accounts were frozen during the investigation. He went from a man with 2 families to a man with none, living alone in a cheap motel, haunted by the sound of 2 children calling him dad. When questioned, David broke down. "It started with one lie," he said. "Then I built a world around it." He admitted he'd wanted 2 lives because each gave him something the other didn't. Stability from Laura, freedom from Emily. But his greed for affection turned into a prison of deceit. His words didn't earn forgiveness, only pity. A month later, Laura met Emily in person. There was no screaming, just quiet pain between 2 women who'd loved the same man. Laura told her, "He stole 10 years from both of us." Emily nodded through tears. Neither blamed the other, only him. David's betrayal had united them in heartbreak. David stood before the judge, facing charges of fraud and identity falsification. He pled guilty, receiving 5 years probation and community service. But the true punishment wasn't legal, it was personal. He lost his job, reputation, and any chance of reconciling with either family. The courtroom was silent as the judge said, "You didn't just deceive others, Mr. Miller. You deceived yourself." Years later, Laura rebuilt her life, focusing on her children. Emily raised Sophie alone, choosing never to mention Daniel again. As for David, he disappeared quietly, rumored to be working odd jobs under yet another name. But in 2 different cities, 2 children still asked the same painful question. Why did Daddy have 2 families? And there was no answer that could make sense of a decade of lies.